Good Friday morning and welcome to Commentator's Corner as we get set to begin season number 2. And for the first time, myself, Tyler Reedy, and Brendan Preisman are live in person in our brand new podcast room.
We are indeed, and this is just great to be here. We've got a nice new microphone. We were doing this basically live, but it is so good to be back for senior year. One last ride for the podcast, one last ride for the commentary. Hey, game tonight at Westside. That's going to be pretty important.
Yeah, I heard there's a pretty important football game happening, I guess. Top 10 matchup. But yeah, here we go, right away.
What do you mean? Nebraska-Illinois is in the top 10 matchup?
Well, yeah, number 2, Omaha Westside is visiting the number 7 ranked Creighton Prep Junior Jays to begin the regular season. And you can't start off a season much better. I mean, it just feels like a big, coming back party, honestly. We're going to have a packed birdcage. We're going to have a packed student section on the other side for Westside. It should just be a great football atmosphere. It feels really nice to be back.
That's one of the things that's going to be extra important about this game. Not just the fact that Westside's the defending champs or the fact that Creighton Prep hasn't beaten Westside in varsity football since before either of us were at school. But there's also the fact that we're going to have a full cage. They're going to have a full student section for the first time in a long, long time for a football game. And that's only going to add to the intensity. It should be just a fantastic, fantastic game.
Yeah, I remember last year that game was week 1 as well, and that was at a point in the season where no students were allowed to attend the game aside from family. So it's definitely going to be a different atmosphere tonight, and we can't wait for it. So as we preview the Prep Westside game, if you've been following Brendan Preisman on Twitter, you know all about it.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful experience, but Brendan has been previewing it, and we'll give you a little taste of it as well here. Westside has dominated since we have been here at Creighton Prep since 2018. 2018, Westside 37, Prep 2. 2019, in the regular season, Westside 49, Prep 21. In the playoffs, Westside 49, Prep 13. And then last year to open the season, Westside 42, Prep nothing. It was a shutout. So Prep, who was actually a win away from playing Westside in the state semifinals last year, they lost to Millard South, but Prep's got a lot to prove tonight, no doubt about it.
They certainly do. I can still remember my freshman year reading in the Omaha World Herald, 10 games to watch in high school football this year, and Prep Westside was number 3 on that list. It's just this is always such a great rivalry. Last year it was a dramatic finish. And then I remember walking out of Westside's field with my dad just being shell-shocked.
Yeah.
Because it was, it should be a different game this year because Westside lost 2 extremely important players for their team. They lost Cole Payton. He accounted for nearly 3,000 total yards and just about, it looks like 40 touchdowns last year. Avante Dickerson had 86 total yards, with 15 touchdowns. He also added 4 interceptions. And then they lose 4 guys who had more than 50 tackles last year. So this should be different than the 42-0 or the 49-13 that Prep fans are, for some reason, getting used to.
Yeah, and another part of that, I feel like, is that this Prep team has a little bit of a different feel to it, I think. The past couple years, it's been a little bit difficult to find a true identity for these Prep football teams, aside from the second half of last year when we figured out how well they could run the ball. But this year, we're going into it. We've got a really nice backfield with Prep. Jack Stessman leading the way, 950 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns a year ago. And then guys like Shamar Brown, who combines speed and power extremely well. And then John Pargo, who's got blazing speed behind him as well. And then the offensive line, Sam Sledge, Rocco Marcelino, Cole Jarrett, all have experience. Sledge has a D1 offer from University of Miami, Ohio. And then those guys can flip over and play the defensive line. So Prep in the trenches could be able to control the clock, make it a little bit of a different game this year.
Yeah, you hear with Prep this year more so than ever about how great the running backs room is, how great the skill positions are going to be. And that's going to be super important. But the key is, as always with Prep really, is going to be quarterback play because we've had a couple of years now where the quarterback play has been, not at the top level. We've never had a guy who could go toe-to-toe with a Cole Payton, for example. And senior Jack Piernicki, we have to hope that he's that guy for Prep. And it's not like he's starting off with a cupcake game either.
No.
They're throwing him straight into the fire against a team that had, 19 sacks last year and 12 interceptions.
Yeah, Piernicki is going to have pretty difficult challenge in front of him tonight. He played a little bit last year in that Lincoln Northeast game, which Prep won 68-0. He went 3 for 3 on passing. They were all shovel passes and bubble screens, so nothing too difficult there. But 29 passing yards. He also carried the ball 3 times, had 30 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Not sure how much they'll ask him to throw the ball tonight, especially with that tough defense, as he mentioned, but one thing I'm definitely interested to see is his mobility. He's built a little bit different than some of the guys we've seen in the past, like Sam Meisenberg, John Caniglio, who have a decent amount of mobility but don't carry the ball too often. Pernicke is long, he's lanky, he's tall. He's kind of difficult to tackle. We saw that in the Lincoln Northeast game, and I'm interested to see how that kind of supplements the strong backfield.
The key with Pernicke is that the guys you mentioned, like Meisenberg and Caniglio, they were good at running, but it was more like a power run, kind of like a Sam Ellinger style type quarterback run. If they're going to run, it's going to be like a QB power up the middle for 3 yards. But with Pernicke, because of his speed and because of his agility, you can add another dimension, like, say, the read option or even the triple option in, because the best way for Prep to win this game is probably going to be to showcase their backfield. And why not make it so that any guy in there has a chance to get the ball on any given play?
Yeah, the backfield is going to be so key because the last few years we've just seen Prep have a drive right away, go 3 and out, give the ball to Westside, and they just start running the ball, controlling the entire flow and momentum of the game. So Prep can definitely change that tonight. And another thing that you mentioned in your Twitter keys to the game, avoiding third and longs, avoiding penalties, sacks. Prep has got to stay ahead of the chains, and the run game can certainly help with that tonight.
And that brings me back to something you mentioned earlier. You talked about how Prep doesn't want Pernicke to necessarily throw the ball too much in his opening game as a varsity starter. And the way to do that is to avoid third and longs. You remember, you talked about it last year in the Westside game. It was just, you couldn't get going. It was either a sack or a penalty on every drive. Like, I'm not sure we crossed midfield until late in the second quarter, and even then it didn't amount to much. So the key is going to be saving the passes for when they're absolutely needed most, and a sub-key to that would be like, make sure you don't need to pass the ball too much, because if Stessman's running the ball, or Charmar Brown, or John Pargo, or whichever one of Prep's great running backs is going to be the bell cow this year, it's most likely Stessman, but you never know. As long as those guys are running the ball well, Prep's offense should be clicking pretty well.
Yeah, no doubt about it, but they've got a lot to compete with on the other side. Westside's offense is certainly no slacker, coming off a state championship, and the guy, very clearly for Westside's offense, is the running back, Dom Rezac. He is the lead guy. He kind of shared time with Avante Dickerson and Kobe Bretz, as you mentioned, last year, but this year, he's committed to Air Force. He's a senior, and last year he ran for 1,310 yards and 18 touchdowns. And he's got a strong sophomore, Jamez Ross, who's going to create a strong 1-2 punch in that backfield as well. So Westside's run game could be difficult to stop. It's going to be an early test for Prep, but they've got a good defensive line, as we mentioned, and safeties that can get downhill in Sam Rodino and Michael Palmisano.
I mean, here's all I'm going to say about Rezac. You mentioned that he split time with people. He still ended up leading Class A in rushing yards last year, despite the fact that he only had 39 against Prep. Another guy who got a bit of experience against Prep that last year is Westside's likely starting quarterback tonight, Colby Brown. He's a senior as well. Last year, not too many stats, kind of like Pernicke. 24-41, 238 yards, 3 touchdowns, 11 rushes for negative 23 yards. So obviously not necessarily a Cole Payton-type game breaker with his legs, but that doesn't mean Prep shouldn't be wary of him. And you mentioned the Prep defense, but you probably didn't talk about the most important guy there, and that's the senior linebacker, Jack Kirkwood. They've said that he's had a great summer. He's been a key part of that linebacking core since the start of his junior year. He's got a couple D1 offers. I think he's looking at Harvard for football, which is
Harvard's the big one.
Extremely impressive, yeah. But he's going to have to make a lot of big hits, and he and Sam Sledge, you mentioned earlier, as an offensive lineman, they're going to have to make a lot of big plays behind the line of scrimmage and get Westside behind schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see how it goes tonight for that Prep defense, trying to really turn the tables. We've seen the last few years, Prep has really gotten rung all over by some of these top teams like Westside, like Millard South, or Elkhorn South, but this year could be a different story. Definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays out. So looking past Westside to Prep's entire schedule this year, after this week, they remain at home at Burke Stadium and play a Thursday night game against Papillion La Vista. Prep beat the Monarchs 21-16 last year on the road. So you would think it's a winnable game for Prep. Obviously, we'll have to see how things look after tonight's game, but right after that game, they're back on the road and back into a very difficult matchup with Bellevue West, who looked dominant last night in their win over Burke. 55-14 was the final score. Thunderbirds winning that one. L.J. Richardson, the running back, ran for 4 touchdowns in that game. Bellevue West is definitely going to be a tough matchup for Prep. So looking past Westside, how do you analyze the beginning third of the season for the Junior Jays?
Well, the beginning third, I think, is really the toughest stretch because even if you look later in the season, there's a point where Prep plays 3 of 4 games on the road, the only home games against North Platte, but only one of those teams is ranked. But you look at their first 3 games, you got Westside, defending state champs, number 2 in the state, not the nation, sorry, bringing back Class A's leading rusher from last year. Then you've got Papio La Vista. They're always a solid team. They're very difficult to beat when they're on their game. And then you go play at the number 1 team, who's still smarting from a loss to Kearney in the state playoffs last year and is highly, highly motivated. Mm-hmm. If Prep can make it out of that 2-1, or maybe even 1-2, they probably don't lose again this season.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. 1-2, but with at least one of those games not being an absolutely massive blowout, because what you don't want to happen is have Westside be a 49-14 game and then barely edge past Papio, and then have Bellevue West be 56-14. So we'll see how Prep does start the season.
The key is always making sure that your first game sets the tone. It normally sets the tone of the season anyway, but you want to make sure it sets the tone of the season for how you want the season to be.
Yeah, so after that, after week 3 against Bellevue West, Prep plays another very tough opponent, not as well known of an opponent, but Lincoln Southeast. That's a surefire top 8 team, and they beat Prep quite impressively last season. It was a 24-21 game. Prep nearly came back in the fourth quarter, but Lincoln Southeast looked dominant at times, and they'll still have running back Max Butenbach, who ran all over Prep last year, and then Jake Applegate and Titum Tuioti, excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but they're the leaders of that defense. The Lincoln Southeast should be pretty strong this year as well. And then on the road against Millard West, week 5, that'll be a Thursday night game. And Millard West is rebuilding. Prep probably won't have to make a 26-0 comeback like they did last year. And then North Platte, who made their first playoff appearance since 2004 last year, looking to build on that. They are not a top 10 team. That is a homecoming game at home for Creighton Prep. So that middle third of the schedule, things ease up just a little bit with the exception of Southeast, which could be a dark horse tough game.
Yeah, and then like you look at the rest of the schedule after that, it's at Lincoln Northeast, which was the biggest one of the year for Prep last year. At Papillion South, again, a tough opponent, but easily beatable for Prep. And then finishing off the season at home against Lincoln East, who I think just beat Pius yesterday. But, again, it looks like it's the early season that's going to decide things for Prep, because looking at last year, you could see that the West Side game, I think, kind of killed them, and they took most of the season just looking for an identity that wasn't nailed to West Side's hammer, because they squeaked past Papillion La Vista, lost to Lincoln Southeast, needed that comeback against Millard West, which was a team that they should have probably blown the doors off of, all things considered. Then they only beat North Platte 24-7. And then against Lincoln Northeast, they finally start to figure it out. They run the ball a lot better. They beat Lincoln Northeast 67-0. And then they figure it out. They beat Papillion South by 22. They beat Millard North by 11. And then they lose against Millard South by 14. But there's no shame in that loss. Millard South is probably the third best team in Class A last year and right now, especially after seeing what they did to Millard North last night. So if Prep can get just, not necessarily even a win, but a good momentum out of these first 3 games, they should be able to coast through the rest of the season fairly easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, considering how different and how much better of a team Prep was at the end of last year after a 42-0 loss to start the season, I'm definitely interested to see what they can do if they can keep it closer against a West Side or a Bellevue West. But if you're not going to the game tonight, you should be going to the game. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a little bit hot, but 7 p.m. at Burke, Prep taking on West Side. If you can't be there, tune into Creighton Prep TV. We'll have the game for you. We will have the call on the CP Sports Network. 7 p.m. start at Burke Stadium. Excited to get back to it.
Yes, we are.
Starting the 2021 season. So, moving on from high school up a level to college. We've got college football coming back this Saturday. 2 games are set to go. One of them is Hawaii at UCLA rather. And then the main event, at least for people in this area of the country, Nebraska at Illinois at noon on Fox. The Huskers are favored by 7 points, but this is a big year for Husker football, and especially for Scott Frost. He's been here since 2018, and that transformation that we all expected for Husker football really hasn't taken place, but this is the year.
I think it is, and I think that if Frost doesn't, at the very least, get to a bowl game this year, the athletic director, Trev Alberts, will have to seriously consider trying to find a new coach. Because here's some stats about Scott Frost. At Nebraska, he's 12-20. That is less wins than he got in one season at UCF. He is 9-17 in the Big Ten. And in the Big Ten, he has never finished higher than 5th. And he has never had a record better than 5-7 while at Nebraska. So it's really a make-or-break year because even with Mike Riley, the Huskers were in a couple bowl games. They were, at the very least, beating the teams they should beat. I remember I was talking with my brother earlier in the car about how the Huskers should do tomorrow, and he said, this could be the game that decides the Huskers' bowl eligibility because we've got 5 extra teams on the schedule that we should beat, but the key is should beat. You don't play the games on paper, and this Nebraska team, unfortunately, has done a very, very good job of proving that during the Frost tenure because a team like Northwestern from a couple of years ago that probably should have been beaten wasn't. A team like Illinois last year that should have been beaten wasn't. So it's really a make-or-break year. The fans aren't asking, beat Ohio State, beat Michigan, beat Wisconsin. They're just like, please beat Maryland. Please make the Rutgers game a blowout. Please just make a bowl game. And it's a little disheartening to see how far expectations have fallen because a lot of the biggest Husker fans are people who can remember the glory days of the late 90s and the early 2000s, the days of Eric Crouch, Tommy Frazier, and yes, Scott Frost running things from the quarterback position. But now it's reached the point where the bowl game is the goal. And the fact that things have fallen that far should be an indictment of Scott Frost enough. But if he can't make a bowl game this year, then UNL's really got to consider looking elsewhere.
Yeah, and this is a big game, just looking at how the season starts. You play Illinois week 1, and then September 4th, week 2, or I guess Illinois' week 0 game. Week 1, you come back home opener against Fordham, and then Buffalo at home week 2, and then after that, it's on the road to Norman, Oklahoma to play the number 2 team in the country. So the Huskers, if they want to at least look competitive against Oklahoma, as you said, the expectation is not to beat teams like Oklahoma or Ohio State or Michigan, but they want to at least look competitive more so than they have against the top dogs over the past couple of years. They've got to beat Illinois. They've got to generate some momentum in these next few games.
You remember when the Ohio State game went to game day and then Ohio State beat them 55-14?
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I think honestly the key to the season might be the Buffalo game because a lot of Husker fans are kind of looking past Buffalo like, oh, we're renewing the Thanksgiving Day rivalry with Oklahoma or whatever. And the thing is, you look past Buffalo. Buffalo's going to beat you. They are a solid team. This is not like you're playing Fordham 2 weeks in a row. Buffalo can beat you if you let them beat you. And even if they keep it close, I'd say that's bad enough. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the Buffalo game will be a good marker for how the season's going to go. If Nebraska manages to blow out Buffalo, they'll probably do pretty well this season and make a bowl game pretty easily. If Buffalo keeps it close, or even by some miracle wins in Memorial Stadium, then Nebraska's probably going 4-8.
Yeah, and this year, Adrian Martinez, he is the guy at the quarterback position. No questions asked anymore. Luke McCaffrey is at Louisville now. And the big thing with Martinez, last year he was a pretty good quarterback, 71% completion percentage. He led the team with 521 rushing yards. But what Nebraska needs more of on offense are those big plays. They need some more downfield shots. They did not have that last year. The offense looked really stagnant at times, and there were some really interesting numbers in some of their losses against teams like Northwestern, teams like Illinois, teams that they should have beat. Their yards per completion were insanely low.
Yeah. I mean, the real issue with Nebraska is that Frost, for better or worse, is still trying to make sure that his system is the system that ends up working out, and he hasn't really gotten the best players to be in that system. And not only that, but the system that he's got really isn't too conducive to Big Ten football. You look at, say, that 2012 Big Ten title game against Wisconsin where they dropped 70 points on the Huskers' heads. Nebraska had some big plays in that game. Taylor Martinez had a great run right up the middle that went for 70-some yards and a touchdown. But the issue is Big Ten football, as it is right now, it's not like the Pac-12 or the ACC. It's not even like the SEC at this point. It's still power football, much like it is in Class A high school football. Yeah. If you can win in the trenches, you can win the game. And the Huskers haven't done a good job of winning in the trenches. That's one of the reasons they haven't had those big plays is because Adrian Martinez, a lot of time, hasn't had too much time to throw the ball and make those big plays. So if they want to fix this, then they got to get the line better. And they have to get a decent running game because I know Frost wants to let Martinez just let loose and go, but he can't do that if the defense is completely unconcerned with the run game, which they kind of have been the past couple of years.
Yeah, and the run game should be a little bit better this year. At least that's the expectation with Marquis Stepp coming over from USC. But Nebraska's just got to get off to a good start this season. They can't have close, nail-biting games against teams that they're expected to be superior to. So these first 3 games of the season, Illinois, Ford, and Buffalo, I think you've got to start 3-0, I'd say. But got to generate just as much momentum as possible. Going into Oklahoma, so as we get closer to wrapping this show up for Week 1 here, I'll give you a brief recap on what's going on around Major League Baseball.
There's a drive into deep left field by Castellanos.
Yeah, Nick Castellanos did go deep the other day, but the main event, at least over the past week, Miguel Cabrera hit home run number 500 for his career on Sunday in Toronto. Miguel Cabrera, just what a career. All the clutch home runs he's hit throughout the years, his power to all fields. He's got one of the, most enjoyable swings to watch from the right side of the plate, in my opinion. He's such a nice guy as well. He's just a humble player and a great player as well. And it was really awesome seeing, in the weeks leading up to number 500, the home run he hit for 500 was on the road, but in the home games at Comerica Park in Detroit, that place was packed. It was really cool to see because the Tigers have not been a good team over the last few years. They've been, consistently top 3 worst team in the American League over the past several seasons, but they've been a little bit better, hovering closer to 500 this year, and it was really cool seeing that place packed again and Miggy hitting number 500. And then the other night as well, just a few nights ago, the Dodgers and the Padres, 2 of the teams in that hotly contested National League West race. Padres have fallen off quite a bit, but they played a 16-inning game. And that's not normal anymore because of the new extra inning rules where each team starts an extra inning with a runner on second base. So, if a game goes to extra innings, expectation is that it ends in the 10th, 11th, maybe the 12th, but that's a stretch. But Dodgers and Padres, they didn't score until the 15th inning. It ended up going 16 with the Dodgers winning the game. So that was a pretty crazy storyline as well, and that National League West has been a crazy storyline all season. The San Francisco Giants are still leading that division. They're still the best team in baseball at 83-44, obviously the biggest surprise of the season. Dodgers not far behind at 2.5 games back, and then the Padres have slipped, now 16 games back. So then looking at some important series coming up this weekend, the Giants are visiting the Atlanta Braves, and San Francisco, like I just said, best team in baseball. They've won 5 straight games. They just swept the New York Mets on the road. And then the Braves have been one of the hottest teams in baseball since the trade deadline. They're 17-5. At the deadline, they picked up guys like Jock Peterson, Adam Duvall, Jorge Soler. They basically redid their outfield after the loss of Ronald Acuna Jr. to a torn ACL. But they're hot. they've taken over the division lead in the National League East, and that'll be a good series in Atlanta against the Giants. And then Padres-Angels, not as great of a series record-wise, but
You got Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, Shohei Ohtani and Fernando Tatis Jr. So two of the brightest stars in baseball going head-to-head in that one. And it's a big series for the Padres as well. They've lost 12 of their last 14 games trying to keep up not only in the National League West, but now in the wild card race. Back in May and June, it was basically an expectation that all two of the wild card teams from the National League would come out of the West. And now with the Reds playing better baseball, might not be the case anymore. So big series for the Padres. And then the Yankees and the A's, that series got underway last night. Yankees won 7-6. There were 6 total home runs in that game. So that tells you all you need to know about the firepower of those two teams. But the Yankees have won 12 straight games after the deadline. They picked up Anthony Rizzo. They picked up Joey Gallo, added some veteran experience and some left-handed bats to a lineup that needed both of those things. And they've overtaken the Red Sox, and they're coming up on the Tampa Bay Rays. And Oakland is slipping a little bit as well. They've lost 9 of 11, and they're 5.5 back of the Astros in the AL West. So a lot going on in the world of sports, and we got football coming up right around the corner. The NFL will be starting 2 weeks from yesterday. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
It will be.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we'll be glad to keep covering it as long as you guys keep tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely. So tonight, that's the main event. Prep, West Side, 7 p.m., Burke Stadium. Be there or be on the live stream. Creighton Prep TV on YouTube is where you go. You'll hear us on the call. Brennan, any last notes before we sign off?
Go Prep. Beat West Side.
Yep.
See you guys there.
Yep, going to be a great game. All right, we'd like to thank you for tuning in to Commentator's Corner, episode number 1 for the 2021-22 school year. See you next week. Have a great week.